The problem for a lot of people, I think, in sync is they write and then they just throw off songs and they hope it sticks. But the problem is, if you ask them very specific questions, especially when we get into the metadata, what feelings does this invoke? Because a lot of the metadata questions are like, okay, what is the emotion? What does it feel like? How would you describe it? What we ask more about the moods and the emotions and the feels. And if we're not thinking about that on the front end of creation, we're going to run into having maybe a song that's great, but has no purpose with what we're trying to do, which is get it into TV and film, get it into a documentary, get it into potentially a movie, an independent movie, or getting it into a commercial. Hey, it's Mike Meiers from the Songwriting for Guitar podcast. Before we jump into this episode, if you're a songwriter, guitarist, and you're looking to advance your skills, gain confidence, and monetize your craft, be sure to check out songwritingforguitar.com for all our free resources. So let's jump into this week's episode. The thing I want to talk about tonight that gets overlooked again and again and again and again and again when writing to picture, and I'll pose this question. What is the whole goal of the chords that we choose, regardless if it's production music, regardless if it's a full song? What does it need to do with the picture? It needs to have a feeling. It needs to have an emotion. It needs to invoke something. That is essentially the thing. The most disconnect you're ever going to find between picture, whether it's for production music or whether it's full song, that doesn't get chosen, or if you get feedback that it's confusing, it's because it's unsure of what the emotion it's trying to invoke, or it feels like it's a disconnect between picture and piece. It just feels like two different things. They feel like oil and water. The whole goal, whether it's full on chords, whether it's light chords, whether it's an atmospheric pad, it has to invoke an emotion. And so spending time with your instrument and thinking, how can you unlock some of that emotion? The problem sometimes when you know your instrument so well, you can view it very complicated and you can try to do things that are over the top. But one of the best tricks that you can do is, can you take the most minimal amount of chords, most minimal amount of notes, and invoke different feels with it? And what I mean is, let's take something that would be in an E minor pentatonic, which is literally just E, G, A, B, D. That's an E minor pentatonic, and I think that's great. Let's just start with those notes. If you were to tell me something right now, if I was given a piece of music saying, can I play something that feels reflective, slightly depressing, and lamenting with those four notes? If I sat here, I'm not going to necessarily play all of them at once, but maybe like staggered thoughts when you're in that kind of zone. That to me feels heavily just like depressing. Now let's change the scenario. Let's take the exact same set of notes. What if you told me you had racing thoughts? Like, this is a person, let's have a scenario that maybe they're slightly doped up, they're drugged, they're hallucinating, there's things that are racing through their mind, or every cop show about like some cop that's like driving somewhere thinking to a horrible scene. Let's say it's someone that's the same thing, but coming down from a high, coming down from like a trip or like a hallucinogen. You got to start thinking like that with the most minimal amount. Like, I'm not opening up my DAW and throwing in a ton of sounds. Like, my goal is, can I support at least some of that imagery, some of that picture with the most minimal amount of things? We don't have to play full chords. I don't have to play an E minor, which is E, G, B. I could play an E and a B. And I actually prefer that. I think sometimes proper chords sound wrong. They sound too fancy and they sound too over the top. That feels a little too fancy. but this. Now, if we also invoke dynamics, which I probably say again and again, dynamics are super important. If I just like slam into this chord, that feels like way too, I don't know, it just feels weird. But if we add the damper, we add a sustain, light. So let's say I'm writing with someone, you know, Daniel, since you're writing with Jackie, if I was writing with Jackie and I was like, Jackie, we're going to write something that's deeply emotional, deeply chill, and I want you to go into kind of like that soft falsetto that you do, I'm going to choose like hit lightly into it and probably add lots of pauses so that she has that space in between to start setting that melody. But she also feels like the emotion that I'm trying to invoke. I'm like, she can tell like this is deeply haunting or it's like unsettling. I think that's the biggest thing that we need to do with our instrument when composing, either for full-on production music, which is a whole bunch of reality TV, or if you're writing full-on songs. You have to really be able to connect your emotion in your instrument. That is the number one breakdown between melody and lyrics, because you could have great lyrics and everybody talks about, my lyrics great, they're awesome lyrics, but the disconnect is always chords and melody. Chords and melody, it doesn't matter how good your lyrics are, if there's a disconnect between the melody and the chords. And the chords are the thing that set up that melody. The chords are the things that support that melody. And if your chords aren't emotionally connecting with a melody that needs to be an emotion, that's usually where it falls apart, or it feels like something's missing. And that's where we start to throw too much stuff into it. This is where we go over the top. And so one of the biggest things I love to do is pull up images. I love pulling up picture. I love pulling up things of trailers that have been used before, because my challenge is, can I try to create something that feels like that scene? And so I have a few right here. One of my favorite ones, there's it's a heavy show, and I think it's set the precedent for a lot of things on Netflix, honestly. The theme song, the overall underscore for this entire show. It's a show that was in the UK called Wallander. It's a very dark show. Super, super heavy. If you're going to watch it, I suggest not binging it because it's depressing as hell. I did a mistake of watching too many of it. And it's just basically this, it's the stereotypical policeman. His life is a shambles. He's seeing death and, murder all the time, uncovering things. And basically his life is going down the shitter every single episode, to the point where the series ends with him having the same disease as his father, Alzheimer's, and just like, that's what it ends. I mean, there's no happy ending. It just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Well written, but the overall emotion in that. So think of heavy topic, heavy topic, heavy topic, heavy topic. So I want to share just a little clip now that we've all have that image, which is great, isn't it? And it's like, isn't that a great way to start a session? I want to share right here. So I just have this muted right now, and we're just going to take a look. And this is a lot of the show. So it's a lot of whole going back imagery. He's looking out. Look at the, like, sometimes pause. Look at the eyes. Does that look like someone who's excited about something, that seems hopeful about life? Does that seem like they're excited, that he's excited about anything? Like Kurt Wallander is depressed. He is very depressed. He knows something is looming. He sees too much death. That's it. And then this is a lot of the scenes, because this is, I think it takes place in, like, they try to say like somewhere in one of the Nordic regions, I forget where. And it's a lot of gray. It's a lot of, and again, here he is in another scenario looking. So you may want to write to, the first instinct is, I want to write to all of this. Like, there's so much changing. I need to start writing. This is where I think people lose sight of, your job is, can you just start to write to one part of this? Not the whole thing. Don't worry about the fire, the explosions, the change. What if we were to just start with this? Let's say this is a scene. And just when he starts to look down, that's where it ends. That's all we're going to start. We're going to start with the first 15 seconds. Because why this matters is that 15 seconds, there's no dialogue. He's not talking to anyone. No one's talking to him. He is literally just looking out in that window. And I don't care if it's guitar. I don't care if it's piano. What does it look like? Or what does it sound like when he's having these dark thoughts? So it's like before I did E minor, let's start with like C. Let's start with C minor. Obviously, it's got to be a minor. Now, I'm not going to sit here and go like, I'm probably just going to start to stagger notes because you don't have to be amazing at piano. You don't have to be this virtuoso that's playing. I actually would say it's better not to be a virtuoso because you're not going to look at piano the same. If you're someone that's like, well, Mike, I don't really know like fancy things, or I took some piano lessons, start with just like 3 or 4 notes. So I'm just going to start with 2 C's. I'm going to start with an E flat and a G. And I'm just going to hit spacebar again. So let's just go back here. Okay, let's do it again. Let's just go back. And this time, I actually want to go a little bit higher. I think I was a little too low. I want to go here. I want to start up higher because range and position, I think, do matter. You could have the right notes, but be playing in the wrong spot. And it's the same thing with guitar. You could be playing the right chords, but totally wrong voicing that just doesn't fit it. So it's like, you may be like, oh, I need to add another chord, or these chords don't work. This is where I think about position, because what I played here, I just don't think it hits. And honestly, since he's kind of spiraling out of control and like everything's falling apart, maybe I need to do more like just playing down, less going up. Because up feels a little, even up feels hopeful a little bit, but the idea of going just playing down. So let's start with that. Kind of like that more. So my first thought is then I would start right there and I would be like, okay. I would grab my metronome, I'd tap out what I was doing, and I would choose a BPM. And as soon as I got that BPM, I would treat this almost like a sample. It's like I went to arcade and I found something, I think one of the darker settings in arcade is like Memento, which is like a really just like it's little clips of pianos, little parts right here. But that to me is like, I'm like, okay, let's start with that as a loop. And then maybe from there, I'm going to put together a synth pad that has maybe a pulsing root note of C. And I would start right there. I'd do the same thing, even if I was writing with someone that was going to add melody, because I don't want to clutter the floor with tons of parts. Because if I was writing with a Jackie and she was coming, I'd be like, you know what? I don't want to put so much in the track that she feels tied to, oh, it has to be this. I want her to feel like, oh, this is really dark. I want her to be able to press play and be able to tell what it is, and not me being like, well, it's dark and it's about this guy's life that's spiraling out of control. And I want her to be like, oh yeah, this feels like heavy. And it also feels like there's not really a good ending. Like there's nothing. And that's the beauty about sync too, I feel. We're always, as songwriters, trying to finish and tell the whole dang story, like the whole thing. That's not your job in sync. Your sync is to paint a very specific moment, and you don't have to tell me that it gets better. You don't have to tell me it gets worse. You are literally just there to tell me right there in that moment, that one particular thing. And if it's my life is falling apart, cool. You don't have to tell me why it's falling apart. You don't have to explain when that happened. You just need to state that right now things are falling apart. That could be the chorus in itself too, like falling apart. We don't have to get crazy. And I think that's the thing. We're sometimes trying to be way too clever and that veers off the mark, and it veers off the emotion that we're trying to feel, because then we're trying to be, no, we're just trying to support the emotion that's happening right there. So, okay, we got Wander, where we got a very dark and heavy guy that is going through crazy things. Let's go to the opposite end. Let's talk about something that's more documentary, that's more on the realm of just kind of like information. So let's go right here. Let's take a look at, and I did the same thing. I have no volume on this. We're just going to take a look at the scene. And so the scene is this: darkness. Okay. And then it comes in alien sharks. Let's see what we got. That is a disgustingly weird shark. Look at that. Now, so far, it's not a violent shark. There's nothing. It's more or less, we're just observing it. Let's see if we get into, does it bite anything? No, it just looks, just a lot of up close shots. So I'm like, okay, there's probably dialogue going on where it's someone telling something and then probably feeding. Oh, it just kind of feeds on like plankton and stuff. Okay. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is sometimes I will get things where they just send me clips where I have no sound whatsoever. I just have some raw footage. And in this case, when I was doing Alien Shark, they just sent me a whole bunch of weird sharks. Essentially, I guess the idea was, what was happening was they were going to the depths of the ocean, and they were also doing some animation of what possibly like other sharks might look like. We haven't even seen them. Like, they're so far in the depths that we don't even know what they look like. It's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of cuts. So for me, I'm like, okay, this is where it gets even trickier, because this is where, if there's dialogue, and usually there is with these things, like all the time, it needs to be even less instrumentation, because more instrumentation, they're going to toss out. That would not even be considered. They want things that have some movement, but are still ominous, still dark. So let's take the exact same, let's stay within the same key. But the thing I'm just going to do for me is I'm just going to change the sound. And I'm just going to go to something that's more, that has like an arpeggiation. And I'm just going to pull that up, and then I'm going to look at that screen again. And the same thing. I'm just going to try this, and let's start with, let's see, something like there, and then let's throw in. Okay, so let's try this, and let's go back here to, yeah, let's go right here. Okay, so I'm going here. Let's cut that. You know, now that I'm hearing that, I don't like that. I'm like, that's way too much. I think that's actually awful. I would rather go instead, let's just pick like, I don't know, I'm just going to go in Logic and do a really super simple synth that's more of a pad. I think this is actually way too much. And I think I'm just going to do like a C minor chord. And I think you know what, I'll just take the third out of that C minor chord. And so I'll just do like CG. Let's start with a pad. Let's go right there. Yeah, let's try that. Right there. Ooh, yeah. Let's try this. I kind of like that way better. Okay. So then let's do this. Let's take a look at the picture. Let's go back here. Maybe right around here. Now, right now, I like that way more than what I had before, because I thought I wanted something that was pulsing. I don't think that works. I think it works much better with just like an open C chord and just like holding down multiple versions on top of it and stacking and just letting that sit, because Okay, let's go to the same thing and let's see how much dialogue is going on top of that. I haven't unmuted this, and I'd be curious to hear what's so.
It seemed
There's not even a chord. It's just like they have drums over top of it. It's just like, so it's more percussion.
unimaginable. An alien of the deep sneaking into the shallow waters by night. Who knows what other deep-sea monsters could be out there right now? It's a mind-blowing sight. A monster shark
Like kind of string stabs going through, but they're not like whole chords. They're just notes.
adapted to the dark, lonely depths, showing
So when I write something like this, will I listen to the music? Yes. Like, but sometimes this is also just fun of just like trying to match an emotion, just a feel, just like something on top of it. When I had to write for this, I went through so many different versions. Yeah, it kind of like, what does it sound like when a shark is swimming? Like that sort of stuff. I did a lot of this sort of stuff that were a lot more pulses, and like the titles I gave, like The Hunt, Signals, Only at Night, Hidden Monster, that sort of thing, which is a lot more kind of. But if we break that down, like for instance, here's just the sound bed that I had. That was actually a synth that was just a chord, and I just held that. And then here's just the drums, nothing else. Because each one of those still invokes an emotion. Like the drums itself, it's not a crazy pattern. It's just looped the entire way through. The same thing if I move to another one. This is, again, ambient, kind of like. Now, this is different than the one before. The other one, I was thinking of a scene where there's a little bit more action or is about to attack. Now, I'd be curious, what does this feel like? What would you expect to see? I guess that's the question I would ask. When I wrote this, it was like alluding to something is coming, but stealth, you don't know when, you don't know what's going to happen, because my goal isn't to show that it's going to strike. It's just to give the illusion that, ooh, or that feeling that it's going to be there. And what I find interesting is there's tons of those moments. There are tons of moments within the documentary where that happens, where you have moments where they are striking and ones where they're just swimming around, and it looks kind of docile too. They're just kind of like sad creatures because they're not really that threatening. They just kind of look weird and they're just kind of swimming around. Now let's go to the opposite end. Let's go to something completely different. Let's talk about news programs. Let's talk about finance and numbers. When you think of finance and numbers, what's the speed you think of? Fast. What else? Upbeat. Sporadic. Okay. Eighth. Busy. Clackety. Okay. Yeah. So this was for Australian TV, and this was a news program, and it was just finance. All they told me was it was finance. There's going to be numbers. There's going to be reports, and it's just going to be kind of like data. And I was like, okay, so just data. And I found that interesting because this also has dialogue, but it still has to indicate, yeah, like I think the segment was like, here are the numbers. And so they just called it, so here are ones that I just called, yeah, run the numbers. Very abrupt endings. Then they were like, well, also there's going to be segments where they talk about things that are like underlying economical issues, which they went to like this great detail of like Australia. And I was like, okay. I was like, I don't know. All I know is you're saying it's going to be a little bit more complex. Like these are going to be stories about like things that are not going to have full on issue or answers. It's like, oh, this is something. So something that would where there's a narrator talking about like what's the economic situation right now. But that doesn't matter. I don't have to explain what the economic situation is. I just have to make sure that it feels like I'm asking a question. The other one had to feel like I'm just going to give you a ton of information that's going to be really quick and it's got to be fast. If we reverse that and I said, oh, that one that I just played you is for when someone tells you a lot of information. That doesn't fit. It doesn't mean it's bad. Likewise, you may submit a track and somebody may be like, this doesn't work. This isn't accepted. And they say like the song's great, but it doesn't work, which I think is one of the most interesting things about licensing. You can have a great song that doesn't fit. It doesn't mean you're awful at what you're doing. It just means like you somewhere along the lines, you didn't hit the mark. You didn't hit the emotion. You didn't hit the feel. You didn't support what we think is going to be happening in the picture. That's basically it. And so I find these exercises of just pulling up things and just pulling up shows, muting everything. Yes, listening is good, but also challenging myself to ask that question out of one instrument, whether it be guitar, whether it be piano. Can I play this type of emotion? Can I invoke that feel with my instrument? Because if I can, if I've got a co-writer that's with me and we're trying to write something, I can invoke that emotion and that feel. I don't have to feel like I've got to build everything out in my DAW. I can just pull up a piano and we can start like writing something that's dark and heavy. I can grab my guitar and we can write something that feels, I don't know, like reflective and, that we're at a crossroads. So it's asking yourself that question, what does that chord sound like? Not necessarily what plugin do you have to pull up, but like what sound, what can you play with just the instrument that you have already? Because a lot of these things started with literally just an instrument, like the Run the Numbers one started with me just going. So I did choose not to do something that was, and I talk about this with guitar, what I don't like about sometimes picking patterns where it kind of like is a nice back and forth arpeggio. It's too sweet. But this idea of very sharp, just moving forward, then it resets and starts again. Forward, resets, starts again. That feels like to me numbers. Doesn't matter that maybe somebody's like, well, you should maybe move it back. Nope. For this piece, that's all I need to do. What's great about _2 is the whole goal is to create a lot of the same feels. So I'm never worried about like, I just I'll do the same thing, but I'll change keys. I did the same thing here, but I'll up it 10 BPM. I'll do the reverse of how I start. Instead of starting with just the synth, I'll start with just the guitar. Then I'll add synth. But regardless of all of this, I'm thinking about the emotion and the picture and what the story is. And as I'm creating, I'm not worried about creating every single scenario and everything that's going to happen in that documentary, in that show, in that film, in that commercial. I'm just like, I'm going to focus on one particular thing, even if I don't have a show that's given to me. And I'm just like, I want to make something. I have to pick at least a moment. Like, yeah, if there's a lot of things happening, you will end up with an 8-minute song because you're like, oh shit, how do I tell all of those things that are happening? Don't worry about that. Pick literally just one of those moments and then write to that and ask yourself, okay, what does it feel like to know that as I've been thinking about that, like a vampire, okay, switching into vampire mode, is there pain? Is it just like, is it gritty? Is it unpleasant to see? I'd imagine it is. So it's like, is our song title going to be like "Look Away"? Like, because you don't want the person to see? That's the kind of stuff that I would get into. Because I think if you ask these questions on the front end before anything is like touched musically, you have a better idea of what to paint and where to start, as opposed to just hitting chord, 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 hoping to find something, but really asking yourself, what is this about? And I geek over this because I think this is the fun part. And I've noticed the more I think about it, the happier I am with the product that we get. And it's not me thinking like, well, maybe this will work. Maybe this will fit. I'm like, no, I actually think this is actually going to hit the mark exactly where it needs to be. When they share stuff with me, they'll share just like the uncut, raw, this is what we got so far. This is the program. Sometimes it's like 45 minutes. I think it's 45 minutes because like once you plug in, it's technically an hour show, but once you plug in commercial spots, that's why it's 45. But most of the time I'm just seeing, okay, this is what the story is about and this is what's happening. Okay. And they'll be like, hey, we're looking for dark sounds, swells, builds. Sometimes they won't even get too specific. So my head, they usually love between like a minute and like a minute 35 is what I'm aiming for. I never want to do anything past that. Now, this is just underscore. If it was a full-on song, completely different. I try to do like, cool, if this was a full-on song, I want to get to like 2 minutes and 50 seconds. That sounds like it. Like in my head, that's usually where I'm at. But if it's just underscore, it's like a minute and 30. So I'll start, let's say I love that piano element that I have. I'll tap out what the BPM is. I'll be like, okay, do I want that to start? Well, I don't know. So let's just record that little bit right now. And I'll just move that over. And then maybe I just want one synth pad that is literally just one note that I'll just have from start to finish all the way through. I think I've talked about it before, like almost what's the floor of my song, so that even if I have other moving parts that are coming in and out, what's the one stable sound? So maybe it's just a ducka ducka ducka, kind of like, arpeggiated synth that's low and hanging, or maybe it's just a synth sound that's just literally just from start to finish running through. My next thought would be, okay, then is this piano part just going to be the same, or does it evolve? If it evolves, when does it evolve? Maybe I'll just kind of like copy and paste that loop that I made until I'm like, oh, right here, it needs to change. And then I'll maybe modify it. But then I'll go in and think, okay, so starts with synth, there's a swell, the piano part starts, and then maybe by the second or third time that loop starts, that's where I'll add, let's say this is more kind of like Wallander-esque. I'll add like a subby kind of like synth, put that in. And actually I use Wallander as an example because I had written something for Australian TV called Aussie Lobstermen, and it was the struggles for lobster fishermen. Apparently it's a really tough life. They said a 45-minute and it's tough because there are scenes where they're going out, the weather's horrendous, and they're coming back with nothing, or like 2 lobsters and like a licensing plate. But as I was thinking about this, I think it was it plotting a course? I was thinking of, no, it's not plotting a course. Is it scouting, or is it the scenarios? Let's see which one. Is it this one? Yeah. Monitor has a lot of these kind of like reverse things, and there's these subby, because he's just driving around in these depressing scenarios, and but I was like watching and I was like, oh, the scene that they're showing me, it's gray. And he's driving basically to his boat because he's just like, he has another job and he's trying to make ends meet. And he's now driving to the boat early in the morning to do this. It's gray. It's depressing. And I was just like, dialogue going on. He talked, in his deep Australian, it's a hard life. Try to do that. And it's just like, okay, there's dialogue. I can't have crazy melodies going everywhere, but something and his voice frequency was kind of like mid-high. So I was like, I think having things that are lower will be better because it won't be kind of a clash between the two. All I did was just like, I just muted his talking and just looked at him just kind of like drive around. It's like, I don't know why I was thinking of like the pulsing of his head, because I'd imagine I'd have a headache if I was going from job to job. But you see, like even this, I'm assuming a lot of things, and I'm just telling a story that isn't really a story. Like, I don't know if he has a headache, but does that really matter? Because it's just like we're trying to look into the scene a little bit more and not just like, oh, he's driving and it's gray out. I'm like, oh, what does he like feel like? And that's why I took my synth and I like pushed it, I like, kind of rolled it a bit and moved it up. And then like the transposing is kind of like going a little bit, it sounds shaky. Cause I don't know, there's a point too where you drink a lot of coffee and I drink a lot of coffee, but there's points where you just drink too much and it does nothing for you and you actually feel worse. And I'm like, I bet that's how he feels. I bet he feels like there's nothing. Like he's so depressed. And so I know this is, and it's heavy, but it's like, how do you then capture that with just like a capture that? I think like that's what I was kind of thinking. So that's my thought on the process. Once you initially have like a kind of like this aspect of where it's going, that's where I tend to go with like 4 or 5 instruments, I would say. And it depends on, in this case, I was like low bass, some pulse, little swell. And I was like, that's good. Because I don't think this needs more. I think with this that I built out, probably had the most minimal amount of stuff. I didn't have more than 5 or 6 instruments that I was messing around with. Trailers have very specific big spikes. All trailers, if you look at them, kind of do also follow this pattern of starts off minimal and then suddenly it's like and then drop and then huge and then suddenly it's but like cinematic toms, there's horn stabs, there's strings, and they're very specific things, which means very specific sounds and very specific plugins. You can't make a trailerized version out of stock plugins. So like starting with like something like Logic, as much as Logic's great, there's no cinematic drum kit. You have to have a plugin that you really need to go to someone who specializes in really amplifying into cinematic trailer things. But that's where you would give them the original stems and they would build off of that. Everybody talked about this year, Running Up the Hill, like from Stranger Things that was used. Now, they took the original stems. Now, a lot of it, what they talked about, like, oh, it was great. She produced the song, she wrote it, she owned all the rights, but they trailerized it. So they took the original stems and then somebody went in and then arranged the string sections, then cut it up, then added the steps. So there's very, like huge things that need to happen. And I would say trailerizing only happens when the song is really good and it's been placed and it'll probably be used again. I'm trying to think of times that we've done that. When Heather Evans and I did Labyrinth Heart, that was like a completely different, so this is what it sounds like.
My heart is a labyrinth.
It's cinematic, but not trailerized. It's still a song where we got someone later on to come in and then he ended up adding like a ton of like. So we give them the stems and they basically remix it and they're editing and they're changing. That in itself is like that's another level, but it's great to do that because again, you have a lot more options with your song. So it's like, here's one, because we have an acoustic and a piano version of that song. We've got an a cappella version of that song. We have a full version of that song. We've got an instrumental version of the song, and we've got a trailerized version of that song. So that means the longevity and the possibilities and the opportunities for that song. So we haven't really got into trailerizing. The best thing I would suggest right now is I would look at some of the things here. I'll throw a couple of my favorite. I'm going to throw in right here. This is going to be Tommy Prophet. This is his Spotify, which I highly recommend. He has albums that are literally just called cinematic songs in which he works with artists and he does full on just cinematic versions and trailer versions. He gets probably every week I see him post about another trailer that he has, whether it be epic, whether it's sports related, whether it's movie related. But this is like a treasure trove right here that I would look into. But the big thing I would suggest, if you don't do this already, is writing to a picture. and not necessarily a full scene, but literally just picking a moment within that scene and starting to write. So if it's a song where someone's getting in the car and it's gray and it seems like it's heavy, what does that sound like? Because you're going to hit the mark. The problem for a lot of people, I think, in sync is they write and then they just throw off songs and they hope it sticks. But the problem is, if you ask them very specific questions, especially when we get into the metadata, what feelings does this invoke? Because a lot of the metadata questions are like, okay, what is the emotion? What does it feel like? How would you describe it? What we ask more about the moods and the emotions and the feels. And if we're not thinking about that on the front end of creation, we're going to run into having maybe a song that's great, but has no purpose with what we're trying to do, which is get it into TV and film, get it into a documentary, get it into potentially a movie, an independent movie, or getting it into a commercial. The emotion is still the thing that needs to happen. So if you don't write with picture, I would highly recommend right now just using things like YouTube or going into TuneFind or iSpot and seeing what's getting used, pulling it up, and again, just taking one specific moment. Like how I showed in the wall editor clip, I didn't use the whole thing. I was like, cool, let's just take this first half and let's just say these first 15 seconds and let's just do that. If this became your superpower too, that's where it's like, that's going to work to your advantage, as opposed to someone that may be like, oh yeah, I can write. Yeah, but they're not understanding a scene or writing to a scene or writing for that particular emotion, giving thought and asking, creating almost a story within their head, being like, yeah, they're looking away. Their eyes look sunken, like, do they feel, what does it feel like to feel like down, or like, do they have a headache? And what does the pulsing of the temples feel like? What's the speed of that? That's a weird thing to ask, but I think it's an appropriate thing to ask if you want to invoke that emotion or invoke that thought into someone. So writing to picture, I think it's a great thing that people should do more. All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me today. This was great. This was awesome. I hope everyone has a great week, and then start writing to picture, start collaborating, and start trying that aspect. I think that would be hugely phenomenal. So I want everybody to have a great week. All right, y'all. Hey, it's Mike from Songwriting for Guitar. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And hey, don't leave. We got other cool videos you should check out too. Like some of these right here. Oh, that one right there. That's really good. You should click that. Right there. Just click it.